Okay, hi guys. We are going to go ahead and go through type, color, and layout. And in this first video, I am going to go over type with you guys as we get ready to start on our portfolio project. We're starting now so that by the end of the semester, you will have a well-rounded portfolio to submit. And so we're going to start with type, color, and layout, type being the first one. So you can go onto YouTube and there's tons of videos that will talk about the history of type. And what's important to note right now with graphic design is what type of type to actually use. There's two types that are the most pronounced out of all of them, and that would be serif and sans serif. Serif is looking a little bit like this, right? Serifs have these little serifs that come off of the stem of letters. Serif fonts is what we usually will see in a book. If you have a book that's typed up, the serif font is what you would usually see. It's really good for body copy. It tends to be quite readable. It's what we would use in our body copy in the yearbook. Then you have sans serif. And if you take a look at some of these fonts on here, you're going to notice that instead of having the little serifs protrude off of the stems, it looks like they've been cut off completely. A sans serif font tends to look pretty modern. And then we also pair it with serif fonts. And if you notice, for example, go onto YouTube for a second, to just click onto YouTube. And if you look at the interface of YouTube, you're going to notice that all of the fonts on there are actually sans serif. It's what we typically see when we're looking at a screen. Even if you look at the style guide for Lhasa, it is all Futura font. It is all that sans serif Futura font with different types that we're going to use with it, with different thickness, different weights. But we're going to talk about that in just a second. Another type of font that we might typically see, and we don't see it too much anymore, it had its time, was slab serif. You see this a lot with newspapers. It also had this very industrial feel about it. There were thick and also kind of vertical different fonts used with slab serif, and again, time and a place, we don't really use it too much more. And then of course script fonts. What I encourage students to do with script fonts, and what some of you might have already done with this, is using script fonts interchangeably and also using it more as artwork instead of something that is legible, right? So with script fonts, we see it typically with handwriting, or if you have like a wedding invitation or cards that people have sent you. We usually are going to see one or two words in a script font. And that is because script fonts tend to not be super readable, right? If you are going to read a large body of text, you don't want to be looking at script font because you're not going to be able to read it very well. When script font becomes small and condensed, it's not very legible. But when it's big and bold, kind of like this, it looks great, but you're going to want to pair it with other kind of fonts, usually a sans serif or serif font. Let's talk a little bit about type hierarchy. This is so important when we're looking at design. So really, type hierarchy is the distinction between what is most important versus what is less important. So if you look at this spread right here, we're going to notice that the first thing on here is run with purpose. It is in all caps. It is pretty thick font. A little more vertical. It looks like it's been stretched a little bit. This is called the Babus font. It's very popular right now. And you can see that the author has paired it with a serif font. So we tried to pair serif with sans serif fonts. This sans serif font, there are parts of these stems that are thick and parts of stems that are a little bit thinner, depending on what letter we're looking at, or even what parts of a letter we might be looking at. Compared with the Babus font, the thickness is actually the same with each stem and with each stroke on here. So just kind of make note of some of those things, okay? All right, some things to keep in mind when we're working with fonts, and especially you can see this with the yearbook. When you start to think about decisions to be made with the yearbook or with design, is that we don't want to use a ton of different fonts. When we start doing that, things can look really messy. They look like it's too much going on. Instead, what is something really simple to do, and what was done with the style guide for Lhasa, is you take one type Futura, for example, and you look at all of the different fonts that are within that typeface. So for example, we have kind of like a medium straight font. We have this one, which is light oblique, right? You have Futura Book, which is more of like a medium, maybe a little bit medium thick. You have the Book Oblique, which is just taking it to making it italicized. You have medium. So you can see the different kind of weights in here. Medium is actually thicker than the book, right? Light is a little bit thinner than the book. So if you take these fonts and you pair them together, so for example, a thick font paired with a thin font right here, even though they are the exact same type, it still looks and pairs really well together, okay? Another thing we want to keep in mind with type is that we want contrast and we don't want things to clash, okay? So we try to pair something that is very thick, that is bold, that is in your face with something that is thin and smaller, right? We try to strike this balance so that one font might be not too light or not even readable, and having one font be way too dominant, right? We really don't want fonts that are going to look exactly the same. You don't want to be able to see this, which would be the header font, paired with a subhead font or a body copy font, and have them be the exact same. And why is that? Because of type hierarchy. We need to understand what is the first thing the readers need to read, and what is the second thing, and what is the third, and what is the fourth. So think of it kind of like a ladder. What is the first thing we want to see, then next, then next, then next, right? So we need to be able to do that with type. All right, and that is everything for our type lesson.